Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone, virtually, wherever you are from the world, streaming in right now. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. We're going to do things a little bit backwards. I think we have one session online, maybe not. And then we have one session in person. We're waiting for someone else to show up, hopefully. So we thought we might start with the online session because I think Monica Nadegger from the University of Innsbruck, along with Janosch Untersteiner from the Management Center of Innsbruck are here to present online, and they are here to talk about no business like snow business, the performance, coherence, and dimensions of organizational scripts in organizing winter tourism with or without snow. And I think it's streaming, so thank you, Monica, for joining us. And I will monitor somehow to see if there's any online chat. And then please, if you can keep it to 10 minutes, I'm going to cut you off at 10 minutes so we can have 5 minutes of chat so we can make sure we get everyone in.
Okay, so we do our best to keep it short. I hope you can hear and see us, and we would love to share our screen or my screen so that you can actually see the presentation. I hope that works.
Yes.
Yes? Good.
Yes.
Nice. Really nice. Then lovely to meet you all kind of oddly virtually, but at least better than nothing. My name is Monica Nadegger, and together with my colleague Janosch Untersteiner, we are both based at the University of Innsbruck and at the Management Center Innsbruck in the middle of the Alps in Austria. So at the moment, you cannot see anything of the Alps, also in our case, because it's like rather late and rather dark. But nevertheless, we are very happy to present our work today. And without spending any more time on the introduction, I'll hand it over to Janosch to start with our problem statement and how we actually got into that paper.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica, for your introduction. And hello, everybody. As Monica already mentioned, since we are working in the heart of the Alps, in one of the most dominant economic sectors in Austria, and especially in Tyrol, namely the tourism, we feel obviously committed to the industry in general. However, we are especially committed also to winter tourism because winter tourism generates extremely high value added for the region. And so we are particularly interested into the question in how to organizing sustainably this seasonal phenomenon, which we also sometimes refer to as luck of the century for our region. So in the recent years, we came up with the idea of taking a closer look at the element around which everything revolves in winter, namely the snow. So obviously, snow is an important success factor for winter tourism, but especially in the last decades, as we all know, the actors know, and also closely related to it, the winter tourism industry is confronted with more and more uncertainties, such, for instance, declining skier days, demographic change, but especially the climate change. So as we know that snow is the natural core component of the winter tourism, and it is obviously a prerequisite to foster and implement different winter tourism activities such as alpine skiing, cross-country skiing, tobogganing. So therefore heavily depends on the natural prerequisite for all business operations, so being the primary source for income for the local population. Tourism research until now focused primarily on the issues of economic viability and sustaining tourism economies. However, in line with Vansal and Knox Hayes, we also question that theories that led into the creation of environmental problems can be the same for solving them. Thus, in such cases, researchers increasingly stress the need for critical, relational, collaborative imaginaries where the relations of humans and non-humans, such as maybe animals, plants, rocks, wind, whatever is, co-constitute the world. So therefore, our aim is to accept this challenge and to investigate relational ways of organizing winter tourism with the natural environment in the context of snow. And therefore we ask ourselves, what role do organizational scripts play in the constitution of sustainability, organizing winter tourism in the natural environment with snow? And now it's a pleasure to hand over back to Monica, which goes to introduce you into our theoretical background and line of thinking.
Yeah, so now I have the honor to kind of take a deep dive into Latour and colleagues in a couple of minutes to get you closer to our rather, I'd say, complex theoretical background. So we have two major notions that are really important for understanding our paper, but also understanding like the implications that we want to draw. The first thing is to focus on relations. So we argue that through the relations between various actors, in our case, tourism and the natural environment, reality comes into being. So how we frame these relations is really important in matters of how we want to constitute our futures. So especially with tourism, the natural environment is very crucial. So no matter if you're in the Alps or somewhere else, there's always some sort of natural environment, natural background that is really crucial not only as a background for the tourism experience, but it is very much within these experiences, within these tourism realities. But so far, a lot of research frames natural environments rather from a resource view, as a background, as a landscape that you move in, but you do not move with this landscape. So increasingly, organization and management studies also pick up on these sort of separate worlds or separate rooms, and if it's really like that beneficial if we keep them separate and see one room like the natural environment only as a resource, and our like human world really as the thing where action happens. So all these relational ontologies and thinkings are really based in the notions of actor network theory by Latour. And that's also where we see kind of this conflict involving of what kind of relations do we draw and what consequences do these relations have. So that's where we go into the direction of organizing winter tourism futures and how to do that sustainably. So we see organizing as a mode of existence emerging through relations. So as I said, how we relate to other things basically sets the path on how we also enact these things. So now is the point, when do we understand if a relation is organizational? So what does it take to shift from a rather ephemeral phenomenon to a sort of organized, repetitive phenomenon that can be seen over and over again in our businesses or economies? And that's where we employ the concept of organizational script. So a script coming from Latour is kind of a stereotyped framework of action. So something that you do over and over again, where you have specific actors that are all engaged within a specific story with boundaries, goals, and deadlines. However, how messy and complex our lives and tourism are, there's not only one story, there's not only one role for each actor, there's not only one deadline. So based on Latour and research that's building upon his concept of scripts, we discuss this flip-flopping above. So when does which script become real? How can we know what kind of relations are dominating a field or are dominating our mode of engaging with others? So to make that a bit more understandable and with respect, hopefully still to our time, a short example. Two friends meeting would be a script. So let's say Peter and Paul are meeting at the train station at 12 p.m., which is, yeah, it's fine, it's fine. It's a fine time to meet at the train station. So that would be one script. We have two roles, Peter and Paul as friends. We have a dimension that means a time and a space where they meet, and we have sort of a story that they engage in. However, there are also other stories in their lives. For example, Peter could be a husband, Paul could be a parent. And if then these stories don't align, maybe this meeting doesn't happen for whatever reason. And that's where organizing becomes messy. And exactly this messiness is what we want to look at in the organizational scripts inscribed into winter tourism literature. So with that, back to our research questions. What role do organizational scripts play in the constitution of sustainably organizing winter tourism with or without snow? And with that, I hand back to Janosch. Oh, you're still
Sorry,
muted.
I was muted. Thank you, Monica. So in order to tackle that, we started with a semi-systematic literature review, and we searched for the term snow in the title, in the abstract, or in the keywords in the tourism journals classified as Q1 and Q2, in the SJR category, tourism, leisure, hospitality management, and also from the EBSCO host search engine, and we got rather 230, I think, initially papers, and after sorting out all the doubles or not relevant papers, we ended up with roughly 130 papers. In order to analyze those data, we independently, so Monica and I, we independently coded the journal articles following an inductive approach, and we identified primary themes and relations between snow and other actors. So the coding was oriented towards the three main premises, which would be the first one, the configurations or the characteristics, ascribed to snow. So whether it is natural or artificial, whether snow is seen as risk or as a security factor, or as snow-rich winters, snow-poor winters. The second premise was the strategic and the organizational process linked to snow. So whether it be the technological adaptation with artificial snowmaking, the management of natural resources, or also the image or success factors related to snow. And lastly, the overall context or the challenge the challenge addressed by the article. So whether it is climate change, or also, as we already mentioned, the economic viability or the destination image. Then we critically discussed the performativity of these emerging trajectories and actors. So what are the stories or the stereotype programs and actions around the snow and these configurations? What could be the role of snow in the story? And lastly, what is the inscription device that makes it durable? We ended up with three main scripts. So the first one, according to our results, is the 100-day rule. So in the literature, we encountered that quite often. And that means that snow is a given resource that needs to be managed in a way to create economic viability. And it becomes economically viable when it applies to 100 days in a year. And to be performative, it requires a multitude of entities. It needs, of course, the snow, ideally 30 centimeters of height, so that we can process it. Certain weather conditions and different weather conditions. So in terms when it has to snow, it has to be cold, and there has to be rain or water, or when people go skiing, of course, it's nicer when you have sun and so on. So different weather conditions, you need infrastructure, the hotels, the touristic infrastructure, the operating ski lift, and of course, people, the skiers, the guests, and the staff. And this scripts with those 100 days directly relates to the economic viability. So the second one we identified was a kind of climate projection model. So as climate change is threatening snow reliability, not only in Austrian Alps, but all over the world, there seem to be strategies Okay, so we have to hurry up. Sorry, I try to shorten a little bit. So different climate projection models were developed to somehow be able to it predict the future and the future trends, and in a way to redistribute the relationships with snow. And last but not least, there is an answer to that whole thing, and that's also we identified it as a technological progress. So a new script is introduced to mitigate those current disruptions by the lack of snow with technological progress, so to say, artificial snowmaking. And that's our third and new actor in there. So Monica shortly discusses the results, and then we end up and are open for questions. Thank you.
I will do my best to fit our initially 15-minute presentation into a 10 and explain some Latour along the way. So what we found out is actually these 3 flip-flopping points between the scripts. So point 1, we have where climate change sort of kicks in and disrupts this business as usual model, the 100-day rule. At point 2, we have a sort of reverting back to business as usual through artificial snowmaking. So we have a technological adaptation strategy, a techno-fix, as Latour or critical scholars would call it. And then point 3, which is for lower altitudes already quite near in the future, for glacier areas a little bit further down, is the point where there is no escape, where the temperatures are too high, where there is just no more economic viable ski tourism possible in the Alps. So what is our takeaway in a nutshell? We were kind of puzzled that it's a very one-dimensional focus, usually on economic viability, on economic sustainability in these models. So in the 100-day rule, in climate protection, in technological adaptations, it's always about being profitable at the end, which kind of perpetuates these narratives that critical scholars already criticize, like a nature organization dualism, a very anthropocentric understanding of winter tourism industry and of organizing sustainability. And that sort of cuts off other ways of imagining winter tourism futures, other modes of relating with snow, other modes of more intimate emotional encounters. And that's why we in our paper want to kind of caution and also encourage us as researchers to really look at the rules and models we apply and what sort of performative consequences that means. What I want to say with that, to put it in more simple words, if we tell the same stories over and over again that brought us in this problem of climate change, that means economic growth, sole focus on nature as a resource, we will still keep on doing that, no matter if we label it as green or as sustainable. So what we encourage is, especially for scholars coming from a critical standpoint, to really engage reflexively with these performative concepts. Yeah, and so I think we're just a little over time, but we made it, and we thank you for hanging in there and are looking forward to your questions. Thanks again from Innsbruck.
Thank you both. Thank you, Shen. I'm thinking. Do we have any questions virtually? I don't think we have any questions, but we might have something from the audience. Yes. Go ahead.
On 2 slides back where the figure was with the 3
Could you go back to the slide, 2 slides back where the figure was?
Yeah, could you just explain how you made those lines?
I don't know if you heard the question, but could you explain to our audience how you made those lines?
Yes, sure. So basically, this figure is building upon Latour's framework of substitutions and associations. So you can see the association axis. It means the more relations you have, the more real this sort of reality gets. So if the relations are persistent and if you engage more and more, this sort of business model, this sort of engaging into tourism stays real. Whereas the other axis, the substitution, tells you, okay, if you substitute these relations because actors vanish, because other actors appear, it changes sort of the story over time. So what these lines do is more or less showing like the breaking points, the disruptive points in the winter tourism industry. So for point 1, we have this first discussion of ski resorts becoming less viable or no more economically viable. So papers that engage with, oh, what should we do here? We don't get the 100 days any longer. The temperatures are too warm. The snow is too scarce. Then at point 2, we see models and predictions that engage with this debate of, oh, but if we introduce artificial snowmaking, how can we go back to this 100-day rule? How can we kind of bounce back to our business models? And point 3 is this kind of lost place tourism discussion where it's like, okay, it's the last chance now, or this chance is already over. And we really see this typical business model falling apart, the relations vanishing because there is no more snow, there's no more infrastructure, no more economic viability, and this disruptive climate change script taking over and defining the tourism industry there. So I hope that made a bit clearer in what we try to visualize here.
Was that clear?
Could I then ask, is the solution to introduce a new and different script?
So she wants to know, is the solution to then introduce a new and different script?
That's basically what scholars argue to do. So what we see here is engaging with alternative economical models. So what Gibson and Graham, for example, would label as diverse economies, we would say ecologies also, if we come more from a political ecology framework. So where not economic viability dominates these relations, but modes of care, modes of responsibility, for example, modes of slowness, of standing still, instead of technological adaptation and unlimited growth. So that would be our encouragement to really say, okay, what are different stories that we could tell in winter tourism futures, besides keeping up business models that are obviously not building a sustainable future for, especially if we look beyond like human timescales.
Way to end on a very positive note. We're all doomed.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
We just have to tell different stories. We're not all doomed yet. So we want to end positive.
Is there one more question or?
Maybe I should help you.
Yeah, that would be great because I'm just repeating.
Hi, thank you for your presentation.
Talk into the
Into this one, okay. So I am from New Hampshire in the United States. That's also a very ski-dependent state in terms of tourism. And one thing that seems to be increasingly common where we are is that even if the ski resorts are able to create enough artificial snow, or if there's enough snow at the higher elevations, what we have going on down lower in the resort communities, it's sort of a bleak time of year to visit. We call it stick season because it's just all the deciduous trees just have sticks on them. And it's not the same like winter wonderland tourism experience that I think a lot of people expect when they come to the region. So I'm wondering if you've encountered that at all. I know, Austria is a little bit different environment, but has that come up at all in the literature you've found or in the conversations you've had? That, even if the resorts are functioning, the destination appeal is worse because of these climate impacts.
Yes, definitely. That's a huge discussion. For us, I think it's not stick season. It's usually like the green season where you have these like white stripes on green hills still in like the early winter season, or also in late spring where it's just basically artificial snow. And there, this debate usually really kicks off in the autumn in Austria, where it's like, okay, is this really the way to go forward? Is it really like ski season no matter what with artificial snow? So that's a little bit the rationale of how far can we go to still keep it up with this skiing. So the discussion is very much going on with no winter wonderland in sight.
Isn't it a good point? Or that you start to shift more to summer focus than you do to a winter focus because you can't depend on snow, or your hardcore skiers don't like skiing on artificial snow because it's too grainy. So lots of thoughts. So thank you very much for your presentation. We really appreciate it and hope you have online questions as we move forward.
Thank you for your questions, and yeah, lovely to see you live maybe someday in the future.
All right. Now we're going to go back into schedule. It turns out our first speaker didn't show up, so we're all good. So I would like to introduce three wonderful people who are flying from the other side of the globe now. We're going to move to South Korea, somewhere I've always wanted to go. Maybe there'll be an international conference in Busan one day, because I have been to Innsbruck, so now I'm trying to expand. And they're going to share with us, will the metaverse forever change the meeting industry? And it's a qualitative study on industry experts' perspective. So I'd like to welcome you all to come up and present. And I believe that our wonderful tech guru at the back has this presentation and can go up. So I just, is this our thingy? Okay, wonderful. Just one of you?
Yeah.
All right. All right, and so I'm gonna cut you off at 10 minutes, and then we have time for questions.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Seonjin Lee from Pusan National University. I'm a master's student at Pusan National University, and then I'll be presenting the research work with Dr. Hany Kim and Dongkeun Hur and Jaeyoung An. So our title of the research pretty much self-explains the research question that we had. So this the concept of metaverse is popping up in the social media and the news, and we wanted to see because the discussion on metaverse is usually discussed by those who provides the metaverse platform services, or they are just medias who critically or positively look at this new trend toward metaverse. And then we wanted to examine how the industry experts actually think will the metaverse platform will be useful in the coming future. So one may ask, in what way the concept of metaverse is related to the meeting industry? So this is the data from ICCA, International Convention and Conference Association, last year. They reported that the among the 8,409 events, about 44% was postponed and 14% were canceled. And then the next bigger portion would be the one that happened on virtually. And we also experienced that on our last year's TTRA, and people in this year also participating the conference in the hybrid way. And some of the events went a little further and conducted hosted their event on the virtual space, such as the Travis Scott concert in the game called Fortnite, and then the last one is matriculation ceremony of one of the university in Korea that happened in metaverse platform. So many of you here will be wondering, what is metaverse then? And the correct answer to that question is nobody knows. We cannot define metaverse, and everyone has their own definition of metaverse, and there's no agreed definition on metaverse in both academia and also from practitioners. However, one of the most often cited and used definition is the one from Smart et al. And this definition defines the metaverse as the convergence of the virtually enhanced physical reality and the physically persistent virtual space. So it's basically an intersection between the physical world and the virtual world coming together. And also the authors have defined 4 dimensions of metaverse, which are the augmented reality, live logging, virtual worlds, and mirror worlds. And to summarize, from this perspective, the metaverse itself is not a new technology. It's just a concept that encompasses this many technologies that are related, such as AR or VR, or even virtual meeting platforms. As a theoretical framework, we approach this research in a qualitative way and we interviewed the meeting industry experts, and then we did a deductive analysis, and also we used the inductive analysis. And for the inductive analysis, we use this unified theory of acceptance and use of technology model, which is, if you're familiar, the theory of regent action and technology acceptance model. It's the toward more newer recent evolution of this model. However, the model was developed for quantitative purpose. However, we use this construct as a way to qualitatively investigate our phenomenon that we intend to investigate. Now let's move on to methodology. And our study employed a two-step qualitative study method, as I explained. So we examined the interview materials, interview data in first deductive way, and then in the second stage, we use the inductive method using the UTAT2 model. And we interviewed participants from June to September 2021, and we used the semi-structured interview format. However, because we had the government regulation related to COVID, so while we attempted to interview them in person, but we had to eventually use the emails to interview the interviewees. So these interview questions below are some of the sample questions. And this is the profile of the respondents. As you can see, many of the industry experts had experience participating or hosting virtual events. However, when we asked them whether if they have used this so-called metaverse platforms, most of them had no experience of using them. So now moving on to the result, the first stage, the deductive analysis, resulted in 5 themes. So first one, it will be the necessity versus complementary. So what this means is that some of the interviewees saw that the metaverse, to transition to this metaverse events would be unavoidable for certain forms of events, such as if you're just lecturing, you may not have to hold a physical event. And then for some of the participants, they expected that metaverse will never replace or substitute the current physical events, and then the current form and somewhat hybrid form of events will continue. And second would be the general applicability of the metaverse technology. This is more so related to specific type of the events. And then, for example, the interviewees specifically mentioned that if you go to the exhibition, one of the purpose of the exhibition is just to check the physical product, and you may not able to do that in the metaverse world. So depending on the type and purpose of the event, the metaverse may not be applicable for certain events. And third is the technology-related issues. So many of you would have experienced being disconnected from Zoom session and then being so much frustrated. And this applies same to the metaverse. If you have a bad internet connection, then it will affect your experience. And then fourth is the cost and profitability. Some said it's more costly because you have to implement this new technology. And then some also mentioned that, well, you also save a lot of money to pay the participants to, the flights and the accommodations. And then in that way, it will be more profitable for hosters. And then long-term versus short-term is related to whether this would be just a thing for the pandemic era, or whether this trend toward metaverse will continue. And there were some conflicting opinions on this as well. And since we are running out of time, I'll just briefly explain inductive result, and for all of the construct, including performance expectancy, effort expectancy, and social influence, facilitating condition, and hedonic and price value. So this for the sixth construct, we had the content of interview that matched this model of UTA-UT. However, there was none who mentioned that the metaverse, the use of metaverse is related to the habit. So implications. So this is one of the, we believe is one of the first to examine the relationship between meeting industry and metaverse. And then second, while a lot of the news articles or the providers of service look at this metaverse technology as a solver, as a game changer or everything, but we also see that the industry experts can see this as a threat and both opportunity for them, because when they host event on the metaverse space, there's no need for physical venues, and then eventually it leads to the loss of profit for the physical venues. And then third, as I mentioned, there were conflicting opinions on how generally it will be applicable for the meetings. So limitations, most interviewees stated that they have not experienced the metaverse platform. And I think this is closely related to our second limitation, that is most of the participants are aged between 30 to 60. And we think that the age group of the metaverse platform users would be much lower. However, we also see that when we examine the users, then we will also have a different perspective from about the metaverse platform, and we think that in that way we will see different limitation where most of the participants would be much younger, and then there will be no older participants. And the third, we conducted this from organizers' perspective, and then as I mentioned, we also intend to see the metaverse platform from a user perspective as well. So this is the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Questions? Oh, I have one online. In audience questions? Has anyone ever participated in events in the metaverse? Would be an interesting question. No? Well, we're all movies then. We need the audience for 20 years.
I would have a question if, oh, sorry.
Yes.
By different companies. Do you see one kind of using the meeting space as their primary goal, or are they all kind of competing for similar things right now, or is one differentiating themselves?
In Korea, we have several companies that promote specifically for the meeting or having a workspace within this metaverse space. However, in more global perspective, such as the Epic Games who made the Fortnite, they intend also not to forget the Meta company, which is formerly Facebook, and now they changed name to Meta to show themselves they're moving toward metaverse. I think they are more toward more playful and entertainment side, whereas there are some platforms that's specifically targeted for the meetings and events. Yes.
Do you think this, the whole idea of having conferences and meetings in the metaverse could also be linked to more and more people wanting to do simulations, right? Which, I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but that idea of the abstract becoming more of the norm, do you think that there could be a crossover on those levels?
Well, I think that's a wonderful point, because in the 4 dimensions that I have showed, one of the dimension is the virtual world as compared to mirror worlds. What's the difference between the two is the mirror worlds is just a replication of our reality, and then the virtual world means that you create entirely new world. So, for example, in the Travis Scott concert, in normal way, in the physical way, you'll only see one human size artist, and if the event is being held in platform, he can be in many places or even bigger than how he actually is. So I think in that way, the metaverse platform could be a new, new interest for the participant who want to have like different experiences. And then it also related to how costly are these technologies and the gadgets for the metaverse are. It's the prices are going much lower, where we used to pay like $2,000 for this VR headsets. Now it's more accessible. For example, it's about like $400 to $500, then you can enjoy this content. So I also think that the lower cost of these technologies would also influence this trend toward the metaverse.
Any other questions? I feel like my head's exploding a little bit. I feel like I'm almost listening to a Marvel. Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And now we have, I don't think I need to go into the microphone, we have an online presentation. Perhaps Monica, I think so. Maybe it is Monica. Yes, it is. No, it is.
And I'll go to the microphone just so we can see it. So thank you, Monica, because it's nice to see a human being on the other side of a screen. She's gone. She's gone. So our final presentation was sent in. They don't think they're going to be here for question and answer because they are somewhere overseas at the moment, but that might be debatable. And it's about, could tourism be the real gold mine? And it's by Adriana Szabo from Arizona State University and Bruno Ferreira from Arizona State University. So I'm not quite sure if they're in Arizona or somewhere else, but they did just send in a video presentation. So we'll see how it goes.
Hello, I'm Adriana Szabo. I'm a lecturer at ASU's Hainan University International Tourism College in Hainan. Together with Dr. Ferreira, we're going to attempt to answer the question on whether tourism can be the real gold mine. To answer this question, we look at the case of Roșia Montana, a community in western Romania. This case centers on a 2 decades-long dispute over a proposed gold mine, with the local community opposing the project due to environmental concerns, and the Canadian company and its governmental partners insisting that this was a wise economic development project. The first phase of this research project, this multi-year research project, was funded with a grant from the Rural Sociological Society. Roșia Montana has a millenary history of gold mining. However, focusing on its recent history, the state-run mines closed in 2006, leaving many in the community unemployed. This was due to a pre-European Union accession condition, given that the mining industry was very much relying on obsolete technology, was very polluting and unsafe, therefore not meeting European indicators of environmental health. However, before 2006, Canadian company Gabriel Resources, through its subsidiary Roșia Montana Gold Corporation, had struck a deal with the Romanian government to continue to mine the remaining gold using a cyanide-based technology that would have posed significant threats to the local environment. Despite promises of tax revenue and job creation for a few years, the mining project encountered local opposition very early on. This materialized in the creation of Alburnus Major, a local organization started and run by opponents of the project. They initiated the Save Roșia Montana campaign, focusing on raising awareness over the potential destructive nature of this mining project due to its use of cyanide and due to the fact that it would use mountaintop removal, which is a very environmentally damaging type of mining. As a result, Albornoz Mayor also engaged in a legal battle, contesting the permitting process that the company had to go through before being able to start the mine. Instead, the community also argued that community development could be pursued through less destructive industries, such as tourism, micro-entrepreneurship, environmental activism, environmental stewardship, and heritage preservation. The first phase of this multi-year research project followed a qualitative design. We collected data through in-depth interviews, analyzing newspaper coverage of the protests and the Save Roșia Montana campaign, but also looking at company and NGO documents. Upon the qualitative analysis of this data, we saw several emerging themes that we will discuss today. The first round of analysis revealed that the community was far more interested in pursuing natural and cultural heritage protection, including seeking UNESCO World Heritage recognition, and that they wanted to divest from extractive industries, instead focusing on tourism and environmental stewardship. Local community members explained that the mining project was both unsustainable and short-sighted. They pointed out the case of the nearby Roșia-Poieni copper mine and the destruction caused by a similar type of mining, which involves severe and permanent destruction to the surrounding environment, as you can see in this picture. Instead of mining, the local community suggested that they could pursue economic development through tourism, as it would provide opportunities for environmental stewardship and job creation for the local youth, preventing their migration to the city. Committed to environmental and cultural preservation, the locals and activists pursued UNESCO recognition. Their efforts, over a decade long, were finally rewarded in 2021 in July, when the community of Roșia Montana was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. While UNESCO recognition guarantees that the site of Roșia Montana will no longer be under threat from polluting and extractive industries, there is a bit of a shared concern that it may lead to amplification of conflict and the museumification of site. Previous research also has pointed out that there is always a risk of site gentrification. As such, I will let Dr. Ferreira detail the future of this research project.
Thank you, Adriana. In the latter part of this presentation, I'm going to try to address some of the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead for the Roșia Montana community. Obviously, there's not a panacea for the concerns, for most of the concerns raised by my colleague, but we do know, of course, that when locals are engaged in the decision-making process, things start to look a lot better. In addition, there are some consensus that one of the best ways, one of the most meaningful ways to have locals engaged in the tourism industry is by a way of tourism micro-entrepreneurism. Not only are they able to glean much needed income, but they're also able to showcase the destination, showcase their communities in their own terms, and in the process they gain agency, self-determination, entrepreneurial self-efficacy, which are of course central tenets to a model of community development that we should all support. There's an outstanding opportunity in the market. Visitors increasingly seek immersive experiences with host communities. And we know that the conventional tourism sector is not well equipped to meet that need, meet that want, meet that desire. This sort of experience, sort of tourism product greatly falls beyond their mission, beyond their core competencies. And in that regard, tourism micro-entrepreneurs, local champions, charismatic people in the community are much better positioned to meet that supply gap. Tourism micro-entrepreneurship can take many forms, and two that appear to be particularly well suited to Russia, Montana are creative tourism and food tourism. This is, of course, based on some of the trends that we have seen in Romania and also from some of the themes that emerged from our interviews with micro-entrepreneurs in the region. Now, when we talk about creative tourism, we are moving away from a more passive cultural tourism experience. So here there's a strong element of co-creation and also artistic expression that make creative tourism much more appealing proposition. The same can be said about food tourism. There's right now in Romania renewed interest for Romanian gastronomy. There's an interest in bringing back old recipes. There are documentaries unearthing the authentic kitchens of the countryside. There's an offer of foraging trips, and of course there's also a seasonal element to it, as it adds to the variety of the culinary offer. And what this does is to potentiate intersectoral backward linkages with the primary sector, namely with small-scale farms in the vicinity of Russia, Montana, and of course this could also create the means to develop a strong agritourism offer. One of the greatest challenges for tourism micro-entrepreneurs in Russia, Montana will be to overcome structural barriers and be able to integrate meaningfully into the conventional tourism offer. The permatourism framework recognizes that there should be a concerted effort by multiple stakeholders in the system to create and nurture symbiotic relationships between micro-entrepreneurs and anchor attractions, TDA, academia, civic organizations, the formal tourism sector, and other micro-entrepreneurs, desirably in the form of a functioning network, entrepreneurial network. Now, some of the encouraging things that we saw was that micro-hoteliers are actually passing off clients where they are at full capacity to other peers. And you might think this is just the logical, natural thing to do, but in fact, this is a phenomenon that mostly happens in much more established entrepreneurial networks. Can tourism be the real gold mine in Russia, Montana? We don't know, at least not yet. It's going to depend on how tourism is going to be developed in the region in the coming years, and also on the ability for this micro-entrepreneurial network to collaborate and compete to complement the formal sector offering. Now, maybe the real gold is in this outstanding civically engaged community who went through hell and high water to protect their built heritage and their natural environment, saying no to a polluting extractive industry, very unsustainable, and embrace tourism micro-entrepreneurship. So ultimately, the case of Russia, Montana gives hope to many other communities in the world who are facing the same threats to their livelihoods. We hope that you found our presentation interesting. We feel it's a story worth telling. We also feel there are many chapters yet to be written. That's why we want to continue this collaboration by way of participatory action research. We find that it is the best, the most ethical approach, given that this is a community that has grown distrustful and disenchanted with many institutions. So luring participants with the prospect of informing policy, I think it's a ship that sailed, and we better focus on problems that really matter to this community and can have tangible short-term impacts. The first step to do that was to secure some seed funding, which we already did, and we thank Arizona State University for that. We secured funding from MLR, Schneider Endowment for Community Research, which will allow us to conduct field work in the coming months, travel restrictions allowing. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us in case you have any questions. Thank you for listening.
I'm not quite sure if they're there, are they? Okay, so they just sent in a video and disappeared into the metaverse somewhere. I'm not entirely sure how we're going to tie all this together. The topic of the session was building partnerships, but we've had ski issues in terms of the narrative of climate change versus economic productivity, and then meetings in metaverses and virtual reality, and then all of a sudden the potential micro-entrepreneurship for community-based tourism in a region in Romania. But there must be some sort of common thread somewhere, and I'm thinking that maybe it's about maybe where the future needs to go in our industry and the different options available to us. But do we have any comments, maybe thoughts about anything that's percolated, any interesting questions? Because it looks like our fourth presenter is again flown into the metaverse somewhere, so we are right on time, and now we are early because they didn't show. I was waiting for the emails for them to come in, but they didn't show. So anyone have any comments about anything? I feel like we should really engage in you because you're here in person, and I'm not sure if Monica is still here as well. But Monica, do you have any thoughts?
I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think it was a quite nice combination, and I especially liked also like the last presentation. Unfortunately, there's no discussion room here right now, but I think, for example, the concept of micro-entrepreneurship that really engages with close relations to a destinations, not scaling up rather fastly or quickly like with other forms of tourism, could be an alternative of how we can frame really sustainable tourism and a lot of like economically, ecologically, and socially sustainable. So I think there is a common thread in these discussions, and I really enjoyed the session virtually, at least.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's interesting though, isn't it? The sustainability argument, we still 30, 40 years later, we're still having the same conversations about what to do next, which to me is a little bit horrifying that we aren't further along the path. But maybe it's a good thing that even the research community is now starting to embed it into more of their academic work rather than it just always being a sideline. And more of the practitioners, I don't know if any of you have been to any of the sessions, they have been starting to talk about it. There was a conversation this morning about changing KPIs. Then we had a session on cruise and whether or not how it can benefit communities. And there was another somewhat interesting session, very first thing this morning, about that people want sustainability. It seemed a bit high level, since we all know that, but putting the kinds of things into action, I think, is the key thing. On my point of view, I think the interesting thing is the whole micro-entrepreneurship has been alive and well because our industry is made up of 90% small and medium-sized enterprises, but the coordination of all those micro and small enterprises is where we fall apart. There's so many good things being done, but it's the big organizations that have the capacity and the power, especially political, to be able to get their voices heard. And so there may be amazing things going on in Romania, equally amazing things going on in Korea, and equally amazing things going on down in Arizona State from our last presentation. But unless we're in environments like this, we're not necessarily sharing them. And I feel that that's still we're not there yet in terms of how we're replicating best practices in terms of scaling up success. We're still very much piecemealing conversations, and maybe there we need a bit more effort to link these kinds of things on how they work together. Because I think even just from the meetings point of view, a lot of those things can tie, different industries together, and everything could happen in each one of those places quite easily. And we're all facing the same challenges in each of these places. Climate change is not a location specific issue. So. Do you have any? You're nodding in the back. Come on, give us a comment.
The connection part, that we're not talking enough to each other, put it all the way down to universities. Just, there's still that competition. Scarcity.
It is. We like to compete rather than collaborate. But the first presentation was all about building and bridging gaps. So maybe we should just have our own insight in terms of how should we bridge these gaps.
Maybe kind of highlight the point how associations, tourism organizations like this, like the CPRA and other forums, actually, it's the important bit to actually piece together these threads. Otherwise, these forward talks will probably never be put together in any other context, frankly. But having it here and seeing it like this, and trying to connect the dots, or at least share the information out there, just highlighting the importance of these types of forums, as opposed to looking in our own little silos or regions.
Yeah, and this is the first time I've ever been actually not the first time I've moderated, but that some people are online, some people are just pre-submitted videos, and some people are in person. And actually with Monica, I think it's working okay because she's still very there and present, but I feel like we're missing a piece of it by someone just submitting that the conversation is far more important than the presentation. So I feel like maybe we need to think about that, because I feel like this is the way forward with especially meetings.
Yeah, it's actually during our research, one of the interviewees mentioned that, the metaverse or virtual meeting get the jobs done to have the presentation. However, one of the key elements of the events like this is to connect and make the relationship, not just during the session, but also the off session, or the break times, or the dinners and lunch and stuff. So I think that's the key element for any of the meetings like this. And then as you mentioned, that it should be one of the key elements for academic research as well.
Yeah, I feel like that's where we've missed in the last 2 years of the pandemic is the human discussion content afterwards. If you knew someone beforehand, it was relatively easy to get a job done virtually. But if you didn't, building those connections was too difficult. There was a lot of superficial conversation to try and be open, telling people stories about yourself that you never would have shared in any other circumstance. But it's very difficult to try and have the conversations unless you have the networking. And I was just looking through the agenda this morning, and I realized like 90% of the things that were online, 100% of the things that were online apart from this, I didn't have any access to whatsoever because I was too busy being present. And so we've talked for so long about being mindful and being present, and then we're being asked to go and look at all these things virtually. And I think if I have the opportunity to go and have a drink with someone and chat and hear about what they're doing research-wise, I'm going to take that hand over fist than turning on my computer and going back to my hotel room and listening to a bunch of presentations virtually. So I feel like we kind of missed it. A lot of people who zoomed in didn't get that opportunity. Although I have to say, finishing up, I don't know what's happening from a networking session after this session right now. I think there's a few chapter meetings, but I feel like there needs to be some organizing for more networking collaboration this evening. So far, I haven't heard of very many things, and that's missing. So you might want to say that back to the organizers, being like, last night was great, ended a bit early, but what about tonight?
There's one social tonight, I think, for upcoming leaders or something like that. Yeah, the emerging leaders.
Oh, the emerging leaders, which is just down the street at a look. Okay, which is just, I think it's on Government Street or 4th Street. And so I would really encourage everyone, especially if you're a new teacher, I remember to go and chat and meet some people, even to go for dinner with, because that's an opportunity to have a social session. And Monica, since you're online and over there, it would be great for you to email in your comments, or if there's anyone that you wanted to have a further conversation with, please let us know, and we can reach out that way. So I guess.
Thanks for hosting the hybrid session. It's always a bit of a extra struggle to have the double role of leading both a Zoom room and a live session. So, but
it's great.
We really
thank you.
Enjoyed the engagement and the questions, and enjoy your time. have
Oh, we
drinks.
will. We will. We'll have a glass of wine for you.
There's the virtual one.
Perfect.
There's the virtual one. Have fun at the virtual networking session. We will not be there. We will be drinking in there.
Fair enough.
I've done enough of that in the last 2 years. Well, we are early then. We're finishing 15 minutes early for our session. So thank you everyone for sticking it out and for presenting. I know it's tough right now. There's so many competing sessions, and then we had all this time with no sessions. I feel like we could have spread it out a bit more, but it was like, well done for coming in person, and congratulations on your research for everyone who's doing those things. And thank you for sitting and listening and asking questions. It was great.
Thank you.